Happy Zelda Month, everybody! And good luck to Evil Grapes editing this in 1 week. I love adventure games, and the Legend of Zelda series is basically my whole introduction to the genre, as I imagine it was for Manny. It also continually provides the best games in the genre, which means I love this series. The Zelda series is definitely in my top 3 favorite video game franchises, if not number 1. And while all the memorabilia is awesome and the manga series is actually really good, obviously the games are the star of the show. It's very rare for me to like almost every game in a series, and I honestly think that the only franchise that matches Zelda's game like to dislike ratio for me is Mario. There are only 2 games in all 20 main series games that I dislike, and this being a ranking of every one of those games, we can get those out of the way real fast and get to what I absolutely love about the series. Since I just finished polishing off the whole thing, it's basically the end of Zelda Month and there haven't been any new announcements for any new Zelda games, meaning this list probably won't be outdated for at least a year. There's never been a better time to list off my top 20 favorite Zelda games. Oh, no spin-offs. Hyrule Warriors, Link's Crossbow Training, Dingle's Rosy Rupee Land, none of that. Without any further ado, let's get to this. Alright, time to talk about one of my favorite series ever. I just have to get through the bottom 2. Shouldn't be much of an issue. Well, I'm about to lose some subscribers, but I'm not gonna back out here. I'm gonna have to be honest. My least favorite Zelda game, and one of the only 2 that I don't like, is the original. If you like the original NES Legend of Zelda and you can't bear to hear opinions that aren't your own, you might want to leave or skip ahead. But for those of you who stick around, let me tell you why I don't like one of the most famous video games of all time. With my parents' restrictions of video games loosened slightly, I wanted to get right into the Zelda series. I'd heard so many good things about it online, and Skyward Sword was coming out in the next couple of years, and I got swept up in that hype. I decided the best game to start with had to be the original. Everyone online said it was still fun to this day, so why not? You guys have a really screwed up definition of fun. Playing this game first ruined my first impression of the series and of the entire adventure genre as a whole. It nearly turned me completely off the Zelda series, and in fact, if it wasn't for another game high up on this list, I might have never played a Zelda game again, because I hated the original Legend of Zelda. I didn't have fun. You know what I don't find fun? Walking around a boring overworld where everything looks the same, there's no real map to speak of, which means you get super lost super easily and can never find your way back to where you're going, or fighting bunches of enemies with a combat system that somehow isn't suited for combat, with controls that half the time don't even work properly, and with dungeons that are horribly designed, exclusively combat based, where finding absolutely anything is a ridiculously long, dragged out annoyance of a fetch quest, and plot necessary items are hidden away in places no human would ever normally think to look. Who in their right mind would look all over the map to find this one shop, buy this one candle, and use it one time to burn down this corner bush, thinking that there could possibly be something secret there? But guess what? There is something secret there, and it's a secret item that is necessary to beat the game. Who designed this? Okay, I get it. Somewhat. Back in the day, everyone got this game because it looked cool, the gold cover and everything. They became their little adventure game. That one game that didn't hold your hand, where it was up to you and your wit and patience to find the game's secrets, and maybe you could swap tips with a friend, or finally have a reason to get that NES strategy guide. It was a cool little game that connected communities and gave you a lot of content. And that's great! In 1986, 32 years later, you can't do that anymore. Nobody's gonna spend a full day randomly dropping bombs on walls. Nobody wants to spend a full day randomly dropping bombs on walls. There are other games to play, other things to do, and nobody to swap tips with anymore. Put simply, everything this game does right, which is very little by the way, every other Zelda game has done better. It's boring, poorly designed, and aged about as well as those Grinchly confirmed videos. It lacks the one thing every other Zelda game has, even the next one on this list: fun. I've played this game so many times, trying to understand why everyone likes it, and never have I had any fun while doing so. On the bright side, it only gets better from here. Well, I just lost half my viewers. Oh well, for those of you remaining, I have good news and bad news. The good news is there's only one more main Zelda game in the history of the series that I don't enjoy. The bad news is... And there goes everybody else. I expect to get hated on for this, but I won't change my opinions because I'm afraid of comments that will never exist because nobody watches these videos. Let me preface this by saying it's possible I don't really like this game because of the result of my experience surrounding it. When I got around to playing Ocarina of Time, I just finished some of my favorite adventure games on Earth, and from the amount of fame this game had, especially its well-known stature as the greatest video game of all time, I expected this game to be the perfect cherry on top. A great adventure game that would put to shame every adventure game I'd played previously. And it wasn't. The internet said it was, but it wasn't. I struggle to say it's not a bad game because there are a lot of points where it definitely is a bad game, but I honestly think that most of the reason I don't like it is my expectations were just set too high. But even games like Wind Waker and Twilight Princess and Majora's Mask take everything good about this game and make it incomparably better, so playing this game after those leaves me with nothing new except horrendous graphics, a soundtrack in desperate need of a remaster, controls more janky than a college kid at a bar, a lackluster story that for some reason the rest of the world seems to think is the best story ever written, and an overworld that's way too open, way too boring to explore, and contains way too little for exploring it to actually be worth anything in the first place. Add to that plenty of poor dungeon design, disappointing boss fights with the exception of the final boss, a mechanic that wastes too much time for way too small of roadblocks, and the fact that the game feels about twice as long as it should be, and can maybe I repeat how bad those controls are. Z targeting is basically OP because it's the only thing that lets you hit whatever you're aiming for, and it centers a wonky camera, and eventually you're just going to drown in all of these issues. The first part of the game is a fetch quest, where you don't know what you're doing, then you go through one of the worst designed dungeons in the entire franchise, fighting the controls the entire time, then run in a straight line for 10 full minutes, hoping you'll eventually end up somewhere, then more fetch quests where you don't know what you're doing, in the glitchy and unfair stealth section, and then you have to run the opposite way back to where you started, for another weird and unfair section, all before you're allowed to go anywhere and have any fun at all. And you guys thought Twilight Princess had a slow opening. The sad thing is there is fun to be had here. I actually had somewhat of a good time with the 3D remake, which fixes some of the major issues like control, camera, and glitches, and makes the game feel more worth your time simply by being portable. And there are parts of the original where I was having a good time, but most of the time I wasn't, and the game stretches on for so long that at the end of it, I was happy to kill Ganon, not because of the atmosphere, story, or any amount of fun I was having, but so that the game would finally be over. Ultimately, Ocarina of Time just feels like it suffered in the transition to modern times. It's kind of like the old John Wayne movies. Those who grew up with it have a hard time thinking it's anything but perfect, but for someone who didn't, it's a bitter pill to swallow. Ocarina of Time was the basis for adventure games going forward, but in the process it got left in the mud. There's nothing unique here anymore, and nothing that makes the game worth playing aside from being able to say that you've played it. At least the 3D version is fun. Sometimes. Okay, if any of you are still here, I promise it's about to get a lot better. Those were the only Zelda games I don't really like, as I stated probably too many times on this list, which means the next game officially begins my celebration as one of my favorite video game franchises. You ready? Let's go! Oh yeah, Four Swords! It's got a great opening cutscene, it's a super fun multiplayer game, and it's ridiculously short. Yeah, that's about it. Not only is it a multiplayer Zelda game, but it's one of the few Zelda games where I actually like the dungeons. You'll quickly learn I don't particularly enjoy most Zelda dungeons, as they often feel bloated, time-consuming, and made more for getting you lost or confused than they are for providing a fun challenge and interesting break from the adventure part of the game. But despite them being randomly generated, Four Swords somehow gets all these dungeons and puzzles right, and uses really cool Zelda items that haven't really been featured much of anywhere else. More than anything else, it completely nails the classic Zelda feeling of adventure. It makes you beg for a full game like this. I mean, it is technically a full game, in the same way that Ground Zeroes is a full game. It might be called one, but it's obviously cut way short. It's a fun ride while it lasts, just wish it lasted a little longer. There's not much else for me to say here. Next. If you're a moderately decent Zelda fan who somehow made it past numbers 19 and 20, you might have stopped at some point so far and wondered, hey, he said no spin-offs, and this is the top 20 Zelda games. But there aren't 20 main series Zelda games, there's only 19. If that's the case, then I can't blame you for thinking that. Nintendo shot themselves in the foot with this one, but it's still a really well made and really fun Zelda game. So, which one of you superfans has heard of The Legend of Zelda, The Ancient Stone Tablets? Yes, this game exists. Why have you not heard of it? Maybe because it's a Japan-only title. That might do it by itself, but there's more. There's so much more. So as you can tell, this game has the same engine and overworld as A Link to the Past, but it's actually quite different. So get this. This game was made for the BSX, or Broadcast Satellaview, an accessory for the Super Famicom that never made it to the United States. You know Nintendo 64 DD? It's like that. The game was made exclusively as a countrywide competitive game show without an actual show, where the goal was to speedrun the game while gaining as many points as possible. The game was only playable for a specified time, even if you owned it, and only 1 hour every week. Every next week, more of the overworld would become available to you and more options and items would open up. After just 4 weeks, the game was no longer playable. Anyone who had played it could send in their best score to Nintendo and get real-world prizes. Imagine Nintendo trying to pull something like this nowadays. But it's still a fully functional main series Zelda game, and luckily we can play it through the power of emulation. Some have called it a master quest of A Link to the Past, but it's really not. Items and weapons are acquired differently, the story is completely different, and there's tons of different things to do, and every dungeon is completely brand new. The game itself is pretty fun, in fact. It takes place at the same time as Link's Awakening, so you don't play as Link, but instead as this guy, who's just a guy who can apparently wield the Master Sword. Baseball cap guy for Smash DLC, everyone, let's make it happen. This is the first main series Zelda game to not star Link, and the first time in Zelda history, aside from a few manga stories, where anybody but Link wields the Master Sword, so that's fun. And the rental shop is here, inspiring A Link Between Worlds decades later. Some stuff was smoothed over from A Link to the Past, but nothing too major. But there are major changes, like the timer. There's always a timer running in the corner, and it keeps going no matter what. And at certain points, it can randomly create effects in the game, like giving you infinite arrows for a short while, destroying all enemies on screen, or summoning random things. There's obviously a much greater focus on score, and that means rupees, which means there are a lot of secrets in this game. Mostly secret rupees. But the biggest thing has to be the 4-week schedule. Each and every week is its own ROM because of how changed up everything becomes. And you have to manually transfer your data from one ROM to another. This is a big deal since tons of stuff is only available during certain weeks. This is what mostly drags the game down. Well, that and its showcase of some really annoying dungeons. The game is already very short, and the constant transference and wandering around hoping to find stuff just makes it cumbersome to play. I mean, it's still pretty darn good and a whole lot of fun, don't get me wrong, but it has more than its fair share of reasons to be this far down. If you like the Zelda series, and especially A Link to the Past, you owe it to yourself to check this one out. The age-old question, can a haunting atmosphere, a cool mechanic, and a boatload of really well-done side quests save you from crappy controls and bloated dungeons? Well, yeah. Okay, so I just want to reiterate this. I love Majora's Mask. I do. Every time I think about this game with its creepy atmosphere and oh so much content, I want to play it again. Don't mistake my meaning when I put it low on the list. There are problems with the game that have led to it being this low, those mostly being the same bad controls from Ocarina of Time, a similarly bland and confusing connecting overworld, and a few bad dungeons, but on the whole I enjoy playing it so much more than I do its predecessor. I love how interesting the characters are, how much better developed the plot is, and the whole mask collection theme in general. The hook of the 3-day mechanic is genius and kept me exploring the whole overworld, looking around for things that only happened at certain times on certain days. The straight path to the story is a little underwhelming, albeit creepy and of a satisfying length, but when you take the deviations, that's where it gets interesting. There are so many side quests, and almost all of them are fun and well developed. Obviously the big highlight is the Andrew and Cafe couples mask quest, but even stuff like the Romani mask quest and Bomb mask quest are special highlights of the game for me. The huge amount of stuff available to you allows you to play the game more or less how you want, and each of the main areas has enough content to keep you entertained for a fair amount of time. And of course the clock town theme exists, and I love it. I do wish that the dungeons weren't so long and annoying because I always struggled to complete them within the time limit. what, I suck at 3D Zelda dungeons. And the pathways to get to where you need to go are much larger and more confusing than they should be. Those are things not even the 3D version can fix. But aside from that, this game is awesome. I happen to like the other games a bit more though. I feel like this game struck a certain magic for some people and just can't be topped because of that. I'm not one of them, but I do love Majora's Mask regardless. Maybe you guys can accept that? No? Oh, might as well move on then. Man, Four Swords was fun. If only it was longer. Like, several times longer. Then it'd be even more fun. You guys know where I'm going with this, right? It's Four Swords, but longer! The single player mode is boring, but when you have 4 people together, it's a blast. It's hard to pull that off because you need 4 Game Boy Advances and 4 specialized cables, and the solo 2D sections are kind of hit or miss for me, but the dungeons are fun, the bosses are great, and it's a full-length 4-player Zelda game. That's it. It's low because it's expensive, hard to set up, and boring with 1 player, but it's higher than the others because it's so ridiculously fun, and 4 player, it makes up for it. There's not much else to say here, you already know if you want it or not. Next! Oh, I love this game! Link's Awakening has such a charm to it and works so darn well as a portable game. I mean, they took a Link to the Past engine, albeit slightly simplified, and made a new game with it with a brand new overworld, plenty of strange and fun characters, 8 shiny dungeons, and a ridiculous amount of fun and charm. And put it all on the Game Boy. Oh, we got a 2-hour car trip to visit our relatives this Christmas? Awesome! I'll just be playing this super fun Zelda game the whole time. This story is better than it has ever been before, the characters are more interesting, and there's just so much here. I mean, this is a Game Boy game. How did you fit 8 whole dungeons, an overworld nearly as big as the Link to the Past Light world, a fair number of side quests, and so many unique items and events into one cartridge? Isn't this system less powerful than the NES? The only reason this isn't higher is because, it has some issues. Like, none of the dungeons are good. Okay, maybe you guys think they are, but every time I finish replaying this game, I can't think of one thing I liked from any of the dungeons aside from the bosses. Or how annoying it can be to find your way back to many of the game's main areas. Or how every time you touch a block that you need to use an item to get through, even if you have the item equipped, it pops up with the same stupid messages. I know ice is cold, game. I don't need you to tell me. It suffers from a ton of annoyances that drag the game down as a whole, but that's all they are, annoyances. And the game is still really fun regardless. And while I can't in good faith put it over this next entry, I will say that it left me happy, satisfied, and still wanting more. Also, the bittersweet ending. That was sad. I truly do love this game, and we happily replay it anytime. The Oracle games. Nobody ever talks about these or seems to have played them, and I can't really understand why. Sure, they came out a year late and a game short, but they're still really well-made Zelda games with a totally unique flair and lots of charms. But I'm not here to ponder the mysteries of the universe, or maybe I am, I honestly don't know what I'm doing here. I'm here to talk about my favorite Zelda games. Now, most people like Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons pretty near equally, and often a ranking of the best Zelda games has the two right next to each other, or in some cases even sharing an entry. For this list, I've split them apart because, I mean, come on. I really love both of these games, but the one I love the least is Oracle of Seasons. Oracle of Seasons breathes new life into the Zelda series, a life that quickly died out and was never heard from again, but life all the same, with a totally unique overworld, different dungeons that are actually well designed, and brand new and awesome items. And it smooths out almost every nitpick I had about Link's Awakening. Yes! The game revolves around the Rod of Seasons, and I and Link can use to change the season and therefore the weather. You can choose between spring, summer, fall, and winter, with all of them affecting the overworld in different ways. For example, in winter there are often drifts of snow that can connect various platforms, and in summer some lakes lakes will be dried up, allowing access to certain tunnels or other areas. Considering there are screens that automatically change the weather and weather controlling stumps show up sparsely, this effectively turns the entire overworld into one giant, very well designed puzzle that somehow manages to not be frustrating or constrictive. And there's a bunch of other cool stuff in the game too, like this witch person who you can bump into and steal from, and the magnetism glove which controls metal themes, which is not only awesome but opens up tons of cool puzzle opportunities. Actually, you can say that about most of these items. There's a ton to do in these games, so I'm spreading some of the shared stuff out to the Ages entry. But one thing I really want to touch on are the boss fights. I don't think I've ever played a Zelda game with boss fights this consistently good. I even made a list ranking all of them after I beat the game and posted it in the comments of some random video floating around YouTube. Maybe I'll find it and put it on Facebook someday, who knows. Also, Onyx is super intimidating and super fun to fight, and his final form is one of the most intense boss battles in Zelda history for me. The game is lacking in interesting characters, not all of the dungeons are good, there are confusing or just plain annoying parts of the overworld later on, but all in all it's a super solid title that you should definitely play if you like the Zelda series. Give it a shot, it's worth it. Okay guys, you knew this was next, I'm sure. Number 12 is The Legend of Zelda Triforce Heroes! Ha! Gotcha. You totally thought this would be Oracle of Ages, didn't you? I honestly don't understand why everyone puts those two games so close to each other every single time. They're related games, certainly, but they're actually more different from each other than A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds are. If you put these games together, you're going to have to put those together too. Anyway, I like Ages enough to put at least one game in between it and Seasons. Enough about that though, let's talk about Triforce Heroes. I honestly can't believe I put this game so low. I love it, it's so ridiculously fun, and every time I think about it, I want to go and play it again. But then again, all those kind of apply for every Zelda game from Majora's Mask onwards. So Triforce Heroes is a Zelda game, supposedly, but it honestly feels a lot more like a spin-off game. But considering I started playing it after a whole mountain of typical Zelda games, that's not a bad thing in my opinion. It's still super charming with great music and is a really fun game. It's like they took Four Swords and Four Swords Adventures and were like, see, this is good, but what if we made it amazing? In this game you go through various dungeons, of which there are about 30 to 40, with two of your friends, solving puzzles and killing enemies and having a good time. But these aren't typical Zelda dungeons. They're fun, or colorful, or dreary, or stylish. But more than that, they're very fast-paced, often only having one or two puzzles on each floor. It's a lot more like a dungeon crawler game than a normal Zelda dungeon, but it's still extremely well designed and requires planning and assistance from all three team members. Even if you don't have two friends with two 3DSs and copies of the game, you can always play online. I mean, it's a little sparse these days, but I was still able to play fairly often, and it's still pretty darn fun. And the single player mode doesn't suck. It feels more like a slow-paced puzzle game in that mode, which I'm okay with because I love slow-paced puzzle games. But the multiplayer is more fun, which is saying something because the single player is still really good. Various outfits change both your appearance and skill sets, and by doing different levels you can unlock different items to make more, and it's fun. The game 100% feels like a game you should just pick up and play when you get in the mood for it, not play through in a straightforward fashion like other Zelda games. That being said, it does have issues, mostly with connectivity. If even one player out of the three of you has a weak connection or bad internet, prepare for an abundance of lag, loading, and frame drops. Half the time the server just completely breaks down, and if that happens, no matter where you are in the dungeon, you don't get any prize or reward for anything that happened. This is especially annoying when it happens right as I'm about to collect a piece of treasure, which of course is when it always seems to. And that's not mentioning how hard it is to gather a full team to begin with, or the abundance of griefers, also known as false heroes, who come online only to throw people off cliffs and get everyone killed. It's a lot of fun when everything aligns, but it's hard to get it to align, and you have to do so for every single level. But it's more than worth it. It's fun beyond all else, and I'm just sad it didn't make it to the top 10. Let's lighten the mood by talking about a game for the ages. Okay, let's stop kidding around. It's finally time for Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. Okay, fine, there's another game in between Seasons and Ages. But, to be fair, I really like Ages. I also really like Zelda 2, which is a slightly unpopular opinion, but if the first two entries proved anything, it's that I don't care if an opinion is popular or not. I'm not sure it fits in as a Zelda game, but as what it is, Gosh darn it guys, this game is fun. I mentioned in my top 10 games I played in 2016 that I only made it halfway through this game that year. That's true, and that's due to the game being unfair. If you lose all of your lives, you get sent right back to the beginning. But I did eventually beat it, and surprisingly had a ton of fun doing so. Zelda 2 is a huge departure for the Zelda series, a departure that wasn't matched until Breath of the Wild came out. It's no adventure game, instead it's a 2D platformer with major RPG themes and a focus on combat. Again, I think it's totally fine that it's different from any other Zelda game. It's a refreshing and interesting take on the formula that actually works pretty darn well. It's not the best made game ever, but it is very fun and enticing, and it's not nearly as difficult as the world seems to think it is. I mean, as long as you're passively good at the game and have a handle on the controls, most enemies can be dispatched without too many problems, and you continually upgrade your character as you go and get multiple spells, including one that doubles your durability and another one that heals you, so it gets even easier, well, ignoring harder enemies. But then again, with how this game handles enemy design, it also makes fighting said enemies very enjoyable. You're able to quickly have sword fights and think up strategies and implement them in the 2D format. Whenever I played this game, I looked forward to fighting the Iron Knuckles. Not only is it the closest thing to a one-on-one sword fight from the NES era, but it's actually a good test of reflexes and skills. You have a shield automatically equipped that repels enemy attacks, so it's all about timing your jumps and ducks to block every attack and land your own in succession. Every time you beat one of these guys, you feel awesome. This game is, as I said many times before, just really fun for me. I love leveling up my character, making him way more powerful than he used to be, and feeling how my skills progress through the game when I'm taking on Dark Link, who, by the way, has to be the most skill-intensive boss in Zelda history, and remembering when I kept getting defeated by the old orange Iron Knuckles. It's not a game I'll replay too often, but one I definitely squeezed a ton of enjoyment out of. Okay, sorry about this, but the video ended up being way longer than I and Evil Grapes anticipated, and so for your viewing pleasure, we split it into 2 parts. The next part with the top 10 can be accessed just by clicking this link, no need to wait. It's also Zelda 2 was super fun. I wanted to restate that because I didn't sound hyped enough in the entry. Play it, unless you're bad. Then play Ocarina of Time, because it's bad.